Salve pueris. Today I'm going to be talking about Latin scansion in poetry. Scansion is a really important part of poetry, considering that poetry was meant to be spoken aloud by orators, often to large groups of people. It was really important, and it had a very large impact on the message of the piece of work. It goes along very well with figures of speech and rhetorical strategies and devices, and is a very important part to poetry. So I'm going to be going over the basics to scanning Latin poetry, and I'm going to be using an example with Dactylic hexameter. So first up, I'm going to talk a little bit about the foot. A foot is kind of a measure almost within a line of Latin poetry. You can think of it like in music. Same thing with a measure. It helps to break apart a line of poetry, and it's better, especially orators, they're better able to recall from those lines. You could think about it the same way as a chapter book, where when you flip back to certain chapters, it helps to remember certain things about each part of the book instead of looking at the book as a whole. For the examples that I'm using today, we're going to be using Dactylic hexameter, which includes 6 feet per line. And there's 3 different feet varieties we're going to be looking at today. That would be the dactyl, which is this one right here, the spondy, and the trochee. And for dactyl, an easy way to remember which one a dactyl is to look at the marks. So there's a long, a short, and a short. And it has the name dactyl from the Greek word dactylos, which means finger. And so when we look at a finger, we get long, short, short. So that's a really great way to remember that. Next up is the spondy, which is just 2 longs, and then the trochee, which is long and then short. So for dactylic hexameter, we are going to get six feet, as I had said. So 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, 6 foot. In dactylic hexameter, we know that the 5th foot will always be a dactyl. So we can just kind of remember that in our heads. And so as we continue along, especially when we go into the example, we're going to want to remember that. Next up, we have choosing which vowels are placed as either long or short. And remember, we have to stay with these patterns, so that's very helpful when deciphering what to do. So first up is we are going to look at automatic longs. You don't have to look at the rest of the words, you don't have to look at the rest of the text to know that these are automatically longs. So the first case is due to the case of the word. So an example of this would be first declension, ablative, singular. A lot of these words will often be pre-marked in your text, and in this case, it's just really easy. You can automatically mark them. The same thing goes for diphthongs. Diphthongs, such as AE, OE, and IE, there are many others, are 2 vowels that are placed next to each other that are pronounced as one. The best example I can think of this is to say it aloud in your head. And an example in Latin would be the word lauda. So if you were to pronounce this in your head, you would not say lauda. You would say lauda. And so since these 2 are being pronounced as one vowel together, that would be 1 long. The next thing would just be grammatically. There's a lot of words in the Latin language that automatically have longs within or at the end or beginning, anywhere within the words. And we can find this out by looking up words in the dictionary. So next up is going to be identifying longs. As I had said before, we know we have, let's say this is just a foot right here. The first syllable of every foot is going to be a long, no matter what. It could be long, short, short. It could be long, long, or long, short. But regardless, it's always going to be a long. So if you have already placed a foot mark, you can automatically mark the next vowel as long. The same thing goes for the beginning of each line. The very first vowel will be a long. So you can automatically mark it as a long. The last one is when the vowel is preceding 2 consonants in a row. So if you were to use the word magna, this A right here would automatically be a long because of the G and the N right after it. along with two consonants in a row, the consonants X and Z can also be done in the same way, in that these are almost looked upon as two consonants already. So the same rule applies for X and Z without another consonant. And then for identifying shorts, it's a little harder, but we can still use the theory of looking at the case of the noun or word, and we can look at first declension not in the singular, for example, will often be a short A. And grammatically, again, we can take a look in the dictionary, and sometimes there will be shorts in there as well. And the kind of last thing that we really need to pay attention to, because very often this is where mistakes and issues happen when scanning, and you end up having too many feet, or you end up having too many vowels and not enough marks for all of them. And this would be with elision. With elisions, the idea behind an elision is when, in English, when we speak more colloquially, we tend to put words into one another and they flow into the same word. This can often be seen with contractions or double contractions, but in writing, we often end up not doing that as it's not proper English. And the same thing can be said with the Latin. When speaking, it flowed better when they were able to have the ums or ems or ams cut off and flow into the next word. And so that is what this is. When we have a vowel plus M, we could use centum as an example, and the following letter is either a vowel or an H, such as erant, so it would be centum erant. The would be crossed out because of this E, and we can just ignore it. It doesn't get a long, it doesn't get a short, and now this E becomes a long. The same thing goes for a vowel before another vowel or before an H. So an example of this one could very easily be sortemque. This happens very often when que is added on as the and. Animo. With sortemque animo, it ends in an E, and the following word starts with an A. And because of this, we can cross this E out, we don't give it any marking, and the A becomes a long. The last thing that we want to make sure of, especially when we're getting into proper nouns, is how I's in Latin often turn into J's. An example of this would be Jupiter. In Latin, this is an I, but when we go to English, we know that this word turns into Jupiter. So when we're scanning, we do not want to be scanning this I, as it's really performing as a J. So now we're going to take the time to go over how we would do this. This is a little bit from Aenied Book 6, around line 305. So automatically we can see that there are some long marks put in there already. And per our list, one of the first things we want to do, which is often easiest, is to actually identify the long marks at the beginning of each line. So with this, the U in hook is already long, so that is the first long in that line. The A in matres is already long, so we can keep that. And this again is the first syllable in the line, so again it's long. Next up, we want to look for any elisions, just so we don't end up making a mistake and forgetting or accidentally scanning those syllables. So when we look through, we can see that in the first line, there really aren't any issues until we hit turba, and then there's a double vowel. And so what we want to do is we cross out turba, we cross out the A in turba, and make the A and ad long. Lastly, when we get down to the bottom line, we see another elision with the in magnum and the H in errorum. So we just cross out and we know we won't consider U to be a syllable. The final one would be the I in pueri, Again, there is an I and then another double I. So we cross this I out and make this I into a long. Next up, we want to double check and see if there are any feet we can mark off. And in this case, there are actually two. We know that the only possible combinations are dactyl, spondy, and trochee. And in this case, since this is the end, we know that there cannot be another preceding syllable. So this itself is already a foot that we can cross off. When we go to the beginning of this line, this E is also automatically a long, so we can make that a long and put a foot line. Next, because every foot begins with a long, we can mark this A with a long as well. One of the parts I like to go through next is to look at the two consonants and X and Z. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for two consonants in a row. So we start at the first line, and we look at the O, and then it follows by an M and an N. So automatically, this is going to be a long because of that. After marking this O, because of the M and the N, we want to make sure to put in a footnote, and when a double consonant, we split between the middle, and we mark the next I as long because it is the beginning of a foot. After that, we see that the A in odd is long, and so since there's only one vowel in between, we can mark this as a long as well, and add in another foot. And when we draw the foot, again, here's a double consonant as well. When we draw the foot between two consonants, just the middle, when there's only one consonant, that consonant goes on the right side of the footnote. So next we start up with odd, and ripas, the I in ripas is long, so we just draw the next line, and the consonant goes to the right of the line. And so the A in as begins with a long, as every foot begins with long. And then we get to efusa. And we see that the U is already a long, and also there are two F's behind the E. So this can also be a long, and then we add another footnote. So that means we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And remember when I said at the very beginning, the fifth foot must always be a dactyl. So that means that this first one is a long, it's both marked and the first syllable in that foot. That means the following must be short, short, to accommodate this trochee in the fifth line. We can draw our footnote. The E is automatically a long as it's both marked and it is beginning the foot. And then the last A is also going to be a short because there is no double consonant and it is not automatically marked. So that will just be a trochee for our sixth line. Okay, in this next line, we see that matres has already been marked off, foot line, and atque starts with an A, as is the beginning of the next foot. So one might automatically assume, oh, there's two vowels together. That must be a diphthong, especially the way we pronounce it, atque, that is one sound. That would be a good idea, but that would be the wrong assumption. In Latin, the U after a Q, very similar to English, the U will always be there, and the U cannot be considered a vowel because it comes with the Q. So we can kind of just scribble that out so we don't accidentally scan it. And with the E, we can mark that as short because there is no double consonant. It is not already marked, so it will be a short. And then the next one, the same thing. This I will also be a short, making this a dactyl. So we can draw a line here. The next one is long both because grammatically and because it is the beginning of the next foot, so we can mark that as long. The E in defunctaque is automatically a long, so we mark that as long and continue with a foot. And the U in defunctaque is also automatically long in the beginning of a foot, so we can mark that as long. And then we get to the A in functaque, and there is no reason to mark it as a short, or as a long, so we can mark it as a short. There are no double consonants and whatever. So then with the U in que, again, same as atque, we kind of need to scribble it out because it's not exactly considered a vowel. And so this E, again, There are no double consonants, so this can just be a short. We draw the foot line with the vowel to the consonant to the right, and that brings us to 1, 2, 3, 4 feet. So this will be our 5th foot here, which we know must be a dactyl. So we can mark long, short, short, 4, 5, and then 6 was already given to us. So let's try 7 on our own. You can pause it for a second, and then when it's all done, I will show you the answers. So pause now. Okay, welcome back. So here is the final corrected line, and I will go over it with you as well. So we begin with the A in Magnum. It is a long because it is the beginning of the line and the beginning of the foot, so we can mark that as long. The A in Animum is not followed by 2 consonants, nor an X nor a Z, so we can mark that as a short. The same applies for the I in that there are no double consonants following it. We mark the line, and we have to remember the is going to be elided because it's followed by an H. So the line is drawn here, and the E is automatically marked, so that will just be a long, as well with the O, marked as long, so that will be a spondy foot. We draw the foot line. The U starts with a long because it's the first syllable of a foot, so that will be long. And then we move on to the U and the E. And again, we want to kind of pronounce this in our heads to double check that it is not a diphthong. So when we say pueri, we are both pronouncing the U and the E separately. Pueri. So this will not be a diphthong, and they will both be shorts. We can put our next footnote, and then it begins with the I that is long. So at first, what you do is you likely mark it as a long, because that's what it starts with. It's the beginning of a foot. And then we see the next I follows it immediately with no consonants between. So that would be another elision. So we'd cross out the first I, and the second I becomes a long. And then we look at the U, and the U has 2 consonants following it, so it becomes a long. Another footnote, and that brings us to 1, 2, 3, 4. So this will be our 5th foot. So we know that it is going to be a dactyl. And when we begin to look at it, if maybe you had forgotten, you could easily see that it is a dactyl still by identifying this inuptaque. The A is pronounced as a diphthong, so it'll be marked as a long. The U, it follows a Q, so again, we need to scribble it out so we can ignore it. The E only has 1 consonant following, so it's short, and the U has no consonants following it, so it'll also be short. That ends our 5th foot, so we can draw our footnote. We start the following foot with a long because it is the first syllable of the foot. And then again, we have another diphthong with I. So that also will be a long, making our 6th foot. Thank you so much for watching this video, and tune into the next video for an overview of the elegiac couplet and the dactylic hexameter as a whole. Thank you so much, and study well.